What if you could prove God exists using only a definition? I mean, no science, no miracles, no history, just pure, cold logic. Well, that is the wild claim behind one of philosophy's most durable and, frankly, most debated ideas, the ontological argument.
We often think of belief as this leap of faith, right? Something that leaves logic and reason behind. But what if that's not the whole picture?
Could it be that logic itself, when you really follow it to its ultimate conclusion, actually builds a bridge to the transcendent? I mean, that is the audacious premise we are going to explore today.
So, this is the ontological argument, and it's unique because it doesn't look for God in the stars or in ancient texts. Nope. It starts simply with an idea, a concept, and from that concept alone, it tries to prove reality. This is what's known as an a priori argument. And all that fancy term means is that it's based on reason alone, completely independent of any external evidence or experience. The claim here is incredibly bold, that the very definition of God, if you understand it correctly, logically requires that God has to exist. So, let's see how they try to build that bridge.
Okay, so our story begins way back in the 11th century with a philosopher named Saint Anselm. He's the one who laid down the original blueprint for this entire line of thinking, and he did it with a powerful and kind of deceptively simple definition.
Now you have to notice the precision here. Anselm defines God not just as some great being, but as that, than which nothing greater can be conceived. In other words, a being so perfect you can't even imagine anything greater. This specific definition is the engine for the entire argument.
Next, Anselm lays down a premise that feels pretty intuitive, right? It's better or greater for something to exist in reality than to just exist as an idea. I mean, an actual $100 bill in your wallet is definitely greater than just thinking about one. So here's where he gets really clever. He uses a classic logical maneuver called reductio ad absurdum, or reduction to absurdity. You basically assume the opposite of what you want to prove and see if it leads to a ridiculous contradiction. So let's try it. Let's assume God, this greatest conceivable being, is just an idea in our heads. Okay, well, since a being that exists in reality is greater than one that's just an idea, we can now imagine something greater than our idea of God, specifically a God that actually exists. But hold on, we just contradicted our own definition. We conceived of something greater than the greatest conceivable being. The logic just broke. So the only way to fix it is to throw out our initial assumption. God must exist in reality. Now, for centuries, philosophers poked holes in Anselm's argument. But then, in the 20th century, a philosopher named Alvin Plantinga gave it this powerful modern upgrade, using a branch of logic that deals with possibility and necessity.
Plantinga's crucial move was to shift the focus from simple existence to necessary existence. Think about it like this: a castle that exists in our world. That's great, but a being that exists in every possible reality, a being that couldn't possibly fail to exist, well, that's infinitely greater. And that becomes the new standard for ultimate greatness.
And this leads us to the concept of maximal greatness. This isn't just about being powerful or wise here and now. No. It means having maximal excellence, being all-powerful, all-knowing, and morally perfect in every single possible world you could ever imagine.
And this right here, this is the genius of the modern argument. Plantinga isn't asking you to believe God exists. He asks for something much smaller. He just asks you to grant this: is the idea of a maximally great being logically possible? Is it a coherent idea, or is it total nonsense, like a four-sided triangle?
Because if you grant that it's just possible, the logic unfolds like a perfect trap. So, step 1. If it's possible, then a maximally great being has to exist in at least one possible world. But then, step 2, remember the definition. Maximal greatness requires existence in every world. So, therefore, if this being exists in one world, it must exist in all of them, including our own. The conclusion is just stunning. If God's existence is even logically possible, then it becomes logically necessary.
Whoa, did you catch that? The entire game just changed. The burden of proof has completely flipped. To reject this argument, you can no longer just say, well, there's no evidence. Now, you have to prove that the very idea of a maximally great being is logically impossible as a round square, and that is a vastly higher bar to clear.
Now, of course, critics have been challenging this kind of reasoning from the very beginning. The most famous objection is actually a parody, and it's designed to show that this kind of logic can lead to some really absurd results.
So, Anselm's contemporary, a monk named Ganilo, argued that you could imagine a perfect lost island, and since an existing island is greater than an imaginary one, well, it must exist. We all know that's absurd. So, Ganilo said Anselm's logic must be flawed.
But Plantinga's upgrade handles this pretty easily. The parody fails for two big reasons. First, an island is a contingent thing. By its very nature, it might or might not exist. This logic only works for a being that is necessary. Second, the idea of a perfect island is, well, it's incoherent. What makes it perfect? One more palm tree? One less? There's no upper limit. But maximal greatness has built-in maximums. All-knowing, all-powerful. It's a coherent idea.
So, you see, you can't just swap in any perfect thing. The logic only holds for a concept whose very nature includes necessary existence across all possible worlds. An island, by definition, just doesn't have that quality.
So after all of these mental gymnastics, where does this leave us? I mean, does this argument prove God exists beyond a shadow of a doubt? Well, philosophy rarely delivers that kind of absolute certainty.
Plantinga himself was actually really clear about the goal. He argued that it establishes the rational acceptability of believing in God. It isn't a logical hammer to force belief on a skeptic.
Instead, its purpose is to show that belief in God isn't a blind leap in the dark. It can be an intellectually defensible, logically coherent position. It suggests that faith and reason aren't enemies, but that they can in fact walk hand in hand. So what's the truly unreasonable position? Is it believing in the possibility of God, or is it taking the far greater leap of faith required to declare that such a being is logically impossible? This argument doesn't give you the final answer. It just hands you a set of logical tools and a pretty profound question. So, what do you think?